Early in the morning of June 21, 1941, I went to the House of the Red Army. Here was to be held the party activity of the aviation garrison. Everyone arrived on time except for the representative of the district, but then he showed up. At 10:00 the activity began. The first word was given to the Corps Commissar, who arrived from the district. He spoke about the international situation, about the need to fully increase combat readiness, about the tasks facing the aviators. I listened absent-mindedly. What was the reason for the order to urgently disperse airplanes on field airfields, to carefully camouflage parking lots and strengthen the combat duty? Upcoming exercises. Doesn't sound like it. Yes, something the speaker did not say. The presidium of the meeting received a lot of notes. Corps Commissar began to respond to them immediately after the report. Here he unfolded a blue sheet, folded in four, thought a little and smiling. Many comrades asked me whether there will be war. I answer, but he did not have time to answer. He was approached by the DKFT duty officer and handed him a telegram. Corps Commissar read it carefully, whispered something to the chairman of the meeting and, turning again to those sitting in the hall, "Excuse me, comrades, I am ordered to return immediately to the district headquarters." Party activity was postponed until 2 o'clock the next day. All began to disperse. Squadron commanders N.G. Belichenko, as Buzunov, A.E. Kuznetsov, and I left the room laughing. "It's good that I did not go on vacation," said Belichenko. "The air smelled a thunderstorm." "Exactly. Captain A. Buzunov supported him. A familiar border guard recently told me that the Germans have concentrated large forces on our border. Let them only stick their heads in," Kuznetsov said angrily, and, turning to me, asked, "Am I right, Comrade Colonel?" "Right," I answered approvingly. "We have something to respond with a blow for a blow. Tanks and airplanes are excellent, and about the men and not to speak of." There was no exaggeration in my words. The names of the heroes of Kasan, Halkin-Gol, Hanko had become known throughout the world. We were proud of our wonderful pilots, artillerymen, tankers, and infantrymen. Exceptional courage and high skill demonstrated our falcons in the skies of Spain and at the storming of the Mannerheim Line. Personally, I happened to participate in the Finnish campaign. I was then in command of a long-range bomber regiment. Leading the first link, I had a Captain I. V. Golubenkov. V. Golubenkov, a brave and well-trained pilot. I liked his persistence in mastering new aircraft and ways of its combat application in difficult conditions. Talking about I. V. Golubenkov involuntarily remembered a case that happened to him in 1938. Our bomber regiment, based near Moscow, was preparing for the May Day parade. For almost a year the crews practiced group flying. Everything was going well, and suddenly, 3 days before the holiday, the commander of the air brigade, Colonel M.P.P. Kazmin, announced to me that Golubenkov was suspended from flying for health reasons. But he did not complain about anything. Who knows what? His face is pale, unhealthy, stood his ground Kazmin. "Mikhail Pavlovich," I pleaded, "you know very well what a presenter is. In 2 or 3 days he cannot prepare. The entire regiment's flight may be disrupted." "So a decision has already been made," coldly answered the commander. "It's useless to argue." Immediately after this conversation, I got in the car and drove to Moscow. It could not be allowed that someone's erroneous decision to cross out the hard work of the entire regimental staff, that we were deprived of the high honor of flying over Red Square. From the ground, we would be watched by those whose hands created the formidable aviation equipment. Each of us lived with the confidence to withstand the upcoming exam for combat maturity. The headquarters of the Air Army was located at the central airfield. In the reception room, adjutant told me, "The commander is busy." "I have urgent business," I explained. "Still wait, he replied, picking up the phone rang. When the adjutant, carried away by the conversation, turned away, I quietly slipped into the office of the commander. Viktor Alexandrovich Kolzunov was sitting at his desk, leaning over a map. Looking up at me, he asked, "What happened?" and hastily added, "Sit down, tell me." I told the commander in detail the story of the Deputy Squadron Commander Golubenkov. Listening carefully to me, he was surprised. "Is it really so easy to just took and dismissed?" "It turns out so." Not even consulted with the doctor, the commander thoughtfully stepped to the open window. The fresh breeze swayed the curtains, slowly lifting the calendar sheets. Here, as if reluctantly, the red number appeared. Mayday. It was as if I was spurred on. Nubby, comrade commander, is it on someone's whim that Golubenkov won't fly to the parade? He will. Her Kozgunov reassured me. And will you be able to take the first place? We did our best not to give it to anyone. Well done, smiled Viktor Alexandrovich, giving me his hand in farewell. And tell the brigade commander, do not change the leading links, the regiment will fly to the parade in the same composition. I returned to the brigade headquarters at top speed. I'm in a hurry to preempt Colonel Kazman, or else he'll call Golubenkov and announce to him his completely unreasonable decision. In the corridor, in front of the office of the brig, I meet Golubenkov. What are you doing here? Why aren't you resting? I have a whole vacation ahead of me. I don't know what resort you're dreaming of before the air parade. I won't have to fly. Then I'm too late. He's already been announced, trying to show that it was no big deal. I sternly remarked to him, there's no time for jokes in the service. Have you been to the brigade commander? What did he say? He said that my face was pale, that I must be unwell. So, suspended from flying day, Golubenkov concluded in a trembling voice. His eyes became moist. I knew well the character of this pilot. No physical pain would not squeeze out a tear from him, but mental anguish can be much stronger. Don't be sad, Captain, I reassured him. You will remain in the parade formation. Here's my hand. It is the day after the conversation at the brigade headquarters. I looked at the airfield to see Captain Golubenkov. I found him among the pilots. He was telling some funny story. Here's another one. They taught a bear to fly. How so? Really? There were surprised voices. Very simple, continued the captain with a serious look. The bear sits in the cockpit and starts the engine on command. Drive off, he steers the car to the start. Take off, left turn, and so on. Not true, comrade captain. Merle, somebody objects. In the air you can't hear a command given from the ground. Of course you can't hear it. He agrees, Golubenkov. That's why they trained the parrot to give commands. We put him in the cockpit and he shouted, take off, turn, and the like. We flew like that for 2 years. They made a good pair, but one day. The captain paused for a moment, and when the laughter of the pilots around him subsided, one day they flew into the zone, and commands came one after a turn, loop. Whether because of the great overload or for some other reason, the parrot suddenly forgot the word landing. Turn, loop, and the fuel was running out. When the parrot saw that the arrow of the device was approaching 0, he patted the bear on the shoulder with his wing and said, You, Misha, go on spinning and I'll fly. Having laughed heartily, the pilots started training again. The funny anecdote gave them a good charge of vigor, and people had very little to rest in these pre-holiday days. In addition to studying, they helped technicians and mechanics to prepare the material part, carefully checked the serviceability of each unit. May 1 came. The morning was clear and quiet. Above the airfield hung a bluish, cloudless sky. A village could be seen in the distance behind the woods. Smoke was already flowing over the roofs of many houses. Some of the housewives were up earlier than we were. For some reason I remembered my childhood and wanted fresh Draken. My mother was very good at making them. She didn't live, my dear, until this solemn day. She won't see her son lead a combat aviation regiment over Red Square. These thoughts flashed instantly. Accepting the report of Regimental Engineer N.M. Pavlov on the readiness of aircraft, I ordered to build the flight crew. After Navigator Malagin clarified the route and time of departure, I gave the last instructions and gave the command to planes. And here we are already in the air. On my right, Golubenkov unit. I can see well the plane of the leader, but to see his face is hindered by the glare of the sun on the cockpit. Approaching Red Square, Commander V.A. Kozunov flies ahead of the regiment. From time to time he gives brief orders on the radio. Listening to Viktor Alexandrovich, I remember our recent meeting, the conversation, his question, and whether you will be able to take the first place. Flying over Red Square, we did not see what was happening there. Crew members were strictly forbidden to be distracted from their duties even for a moment. Inaccurate movement of at least one of the pilots could lead to disruption of the entire regiment, and our flight was watched by thousands of people, not only compatriots, but also foreign guests. During the first 5-year period, our country became a major industrial power and managed to create a powerful aviation industry. to equip its air force with first-class aircraft. If only a few years ago air parades were held at all, today there were 38 regiments of bombers alone among the winged participants of the holiday, and to our honor we flew first in this armada. We were in the sky of Moscow for a few minutes, and the flight over Red Square seemed like an instant. But how much labor was spent by aviators of various specialties to please the native people with their art of aerobatics, to show to the whole world the giant wings of the Soviet power. Red Square, the Kremlin, and then the outskirts of the capital were left behind. A dense triangle formed by 45 airplanes of our regiment began to split into squadrons. The leading 9 took a course to the airfield. Suddenly my call signs sounded on the air, and I heard the familiar voice of V.A. Kozina. You passed over Red Square better than anyone else. You are congratulated on your success by the commander of the Parade Marshal of the Soviet Union, Comrade Budeny. All squadron commanders had radios in their cabins. Did they hear the exciting words of the congratulation just transmitted? They did. Hear first N.Y., Alexeyev, then S. Budyonny, S. Surov, F.I. Menshikov, Vitranin. All the commanders greeted shook their wings. I answered them in the same way. They deserved the highest praise. After all, on their shoulders lay the brunt of preparation for the parade. The main part of the task had been accomplished, but my concern did not leave me. Now it was necessary to ensure an exemplary landing of 45 bombers. This is not a simple matter. As planned in advance, I landed first. In the parking lot near the car, I see the engineer of the regiment, M.M. Pavlov. His tanned face is shining. So he already knows about our success. For the second time in my life I feel such joy, new Pavlov says with a smile. And when was the first? Remember I told you about the service in the north. I remember. Bomber crew, which included Pavlov, then performed a flight in the polar latitudes. The engines failed in the air. We had to land despite the blizzard. On the way to the base it happened that Pavlov lost his comrades and got lost. He wandered around the tundra for several days until he came across a yurt of hunters. He was sent to the hospital with frostbitten hands and feet. Then Pavlov mentally said goodbye to aviation. But doctors still managed to get him back in service. When he was back on the airfield, he even cried with joy. Since then, Pavlov has been serving in our regiment. With the engineer, we went to the command post. There we were met by the Chief of Staff of the regiment, Major A. Parushev. Recently, he was awarded by the People's Commissar with a personalized watch for excellent performance of a special task. At the command post, we found the brigade commander, representatives of the parade headquarters, political department, party committee, even the prosecutor's office. Comrade brigade commander. But Kazmin did not listen to my report. He stretched forward his arms and hugged me tightly. Then he lead the landing, or just in case any of the pilots will make a mistake. Everything, however, turned out safely. When the last bomber was taxied to the parking lot, I reported to Kazmin. The Comrade Brigade Commander, the government assignment is fulfilled. In the evening, all participants of the parade were invited to the Grand Kremlin Palace. Together with his comrades in arms went there and Captain Golubenkov. The pallor of his face, because of which Kombrig wanted to suspend him from flying, it was nothing to do with it. He himself showed an example of piloting an airplane bomber, and as a leader provided successful actions of all other crews of the group. In the Kremlin, we were received by the leaders of the party and government. When they proclaimed a toast to the Red Air Fleet, we were approached by the commander of the army, Vakozhnov. "No to you, comrades," he said softly but solemnly. "Order your health for successes in combat and political training." Before the war, in the same 1938, when our regiment participated in the May Day parade, I had the opportunity to get acquainted with aircraft designer S. V. E. Ilyushin. V. Ilyushin. It happened at the Central Air. Having learned that I was flying a DB-3, Sergei Vladimirovich invited me to a secluded corner and asked me a long time about this machine, how it behaved in the air, whether its combat qualities were satisfactory. At that time, the best long-range bomber was not only in our country, but also in the air forces of other countries. And so I, without fear of bending my soul, confidently said, "It's a good airplane. I just wish it had a little more speed." "Speed?" Ilyushin interrogated with a smile and, after a little silence, said firmly, "There will be." Then Sergei Vladimirovich told me in general terms about his new airplane, which is soon to enter service. "Let's go to the pilot shop. I'll show you something." At the factory, I saw a model of an unusual airplane. Outwardly, it looked like an oversized fighter plane. Inspecting it, of course, I did not suppose that with this machine I will be associated with the entire future service in aviation. In front of me stood a mock-up of the very IAL, which in the Great Patriotic War would become world famous. At first, the IL-2 airplane was not very lucky. Its prototype passed state tests in January 1940, but the military department, contrary to a positive conclusion of the commission, did not allow to launch this machine in mass production. It was said to be insufficiently protected by armor. Almost a year passed in dispute. Then S.V. Ilyushin appealed to the Central Committee of the party. In November 1940, he was invited to a conversation and listened carefully. After a thorough review of the test results, it was decided to immediately begin mass production of the new attack aircraft. In March 1941, 2 serial IL-2 already rolled off the assembly line. From the very beginning, S.V. Ilyushin strongly insisted that the attack aircraft was produced as he conceived and embodied it, that is, with 2 cockpits, the pilot and air gunner. However, at the request of the heads of the Air Force, the airplane was made single-seat. When the war broke out, cost our attack pilots this stubbornness of the military department. After the elimination of the gunner's cabin, the airplane was completely unprotected from the rear hemisphere. This mistake was later corrected. IL-2 began to be produced in a 2-seat version. So serial production of attack aircraft began a few months before the outbreak of war. Aviation plants, including Voronezh, received a strict order to establish production of these machines as soon as possible. Around the end of May 1941, the first batch of attack aircraft arrived at our airfield. They were shrouded and no one was allowed to approach them. In the meantime, we transferred all the DB-3 bombers we had to other aviation units. That's why the war caught our regiment without an airplane fleet. The old machines were sent, but we did not receive new ones. I reported the situation to the district headquarters and the commander of the Reserve Air Brigade, Colonel F.A. Pivin, but in response I received neither clear explanations nor specific orders. And then we, at our own risk and fear, began retraining flight personnel on the new attack aircraft. In advance, of course, contacted the test pilots of the plant from which the machines arrived. They told about the peculiarities of piloting IL-2. Squadron engineers Turenko and Sharikian organized the study of the material part of the aircraft and weapons. Party political apparatus, headed by the regimental Commissar G.M. Serbin and Partogom Regiment, Rumiancy mobilized personnel to master the new technique. For the cause was created a special group of the best pilots. Ichenko, A. Kuznetsov, A. Buzunov, P. Volodyan, A. Y. Karchenkov, E. Elo, Karpov, A. Sivanov, A. N. Panargin, and others. The first steps on an uncharted path is usually made by the commander. I did not deviate from this tradition. After a thorough study of the attack aircraft on the ground went up in the air on it, the heat that day was unbearable, but I, carried away by the flight it seems, did not even notice it. Having checked the airplane in all modes, I went for landing. I did it according to all the rules. Immediately after landing, I gathered the pilots and talked to them. Although the practice I had just received was insignificant, but it allowed me to notice some peculiarities in piloting the Silt. I was followed by Belichenko, Buzunov, and Volodin. They coped well with the task. After the flight captain, Belichenko enthusiastically said, "A rocket, not an airplane." Compared to the DB-3, IL-2 really seemed like a rocket. By its flight and tactical data, it surpassed many other airplanes. But this will be discussed later, and now I will continue the story about retraining which we started, I emphasize again, on our own initiative. In a short time, almost all of our pilots mastered the technique of piloting an attack aircraft. They flew alone and in formation, went to the zone and to training ranges, practiced shooting, bombing, and attacking. In short, the Air Assault Regiment actually already existed, and soon it received, as they say, and legal recognition. It was called, however, the 5th Reserve. We were given a very responsible task. We had to train all pilots arriving to us to fly the IL. We, who had recently mastered the new technique, were entrusted with the instructor's work, but none of us was afraid of it. Everyone realized that it is the difficulties contribute to the development of a real fighter character. Only one thing was upset. Everyone was rushing to the front, and we were still left in the rear. Most pilots were disappointed and even dissatisfied with this fate. Therefore, both commanders and political workers had to conduct painstaking educational work every day. Many comrades were convinced that if our assault unit sent to the most difficult part of the front, the situation there will immediately improve. And there were serious reasons for such judgments. Attack aircraft IL-2 was a truly formidable weapon. By its firepower, he alone could replace the whole company. From the pilots were pouring reports with a request to send them to the front. What are we going to do next? I once asked the commissar of the regiment. People realize that now they are more needed in the rear than at the front. Again, we need to gather the communists. With a noticeable sadness in his voice, replied Grigory Mironovich Serbin. Party meeting was held a few days later. The regiment commissar made a report on it. He spoke simply, cordially, like a wise father with inexperienced children. He told about our failures at the front, which were the result of a sudden and treacherous attack on us by Nazi Germany, about the heroism of our soldiers, about the selflessness of workers and collective farmers, sparing nothing to defeat the enemy. Everyone in his place is doing everything to stop and then defeat Hitler's hordes. And we must understand, well, what is the most important battle line for us now. Aviation units are now being equipped with new attack aircraft. These machines are formidable, you realized it yourself. But your conclusions were not quite right. One regiment will not change the situation on all fronts. We need dozens, if not hundreds, of such units. Who else but us, the pioneers of the development of EI, to show maximum care for the training of personnel for attack aviation? Conveyors, from which the latest attack aircraft are coming off, every day is becoming more and more, and we are here advocating that to emasculate or completely close the first forge of those air fighters who must lead these formidable machines into battle. No, comrades, this line is wrong. I will say more harmful. True patriots do not do this, nor will we follow such a path. For us, the main frontier of the fight against the enemy is still here. Serbia spoke, and I, sitting at the table, sorted out a pile of reports received at the headquarters. Suddenly, I received a note from Captain Bazunov's. Please give me the floor. I was alarmed. Buzunov was the first to ask to go to the front, and now he wants to be the first to speak. What would that mean? Didn't he want to enter into a polemic with the commissar? Until yesterday, began Buzunov, I thought that all the failures at the front are because I am not. There was laughter in the hall. On the one hand, it is right, continued the captain. Without me, without Volodin, without Koshetkov, without all of us, it is difficult to change the course of the war in our favor. That's it, I decided. We'll agitate for sending to the front. I will have to speak and me to finally dispel the delusions of some guys. Where are we needed more now? Buzunov repeated the question posed by Serbin, and he himself answered. After the commissar's speech, I realized. Here, maybe we are cowards? Nonsense. We've already fought against the Japanese militarists on the side of China. We have government awards. And now we're not hiding behind other people's backs. We ourselves learn to destroy fascists as best we can and teach this holy work to others. He made a short pause and, turning to me, said, Please, Comrade Regiment Commander, return my report to me. After him, on the podium rose Volodin. His speech was the shortest. I remain where the party needs me. A stack of papers lying in front of me, melting before my eyes. Pilots and technicians were taking their reports back, so they realized, felt with all their hearts, where they are needed more. What a politically mature people. Such people cannot turn away from the path on which the party leads. Faithful sons of the fatherland, they are ready to serve it always and everywhere. These people know how to subordinate their personal interests to public interests. Their consciousness is above the outbreak of desire, at first glance seemingly justified and even natural. Take Volodin, for example. He aspired to become a fighter pilot in reality and in dreams saw figures of aerobatics. Dreamed, having risen into the sky, to wrap up something that would make an outside observer's heart stop for a minute. He would say, "What a pilot, what a hero." Volodin's dream came true, but not quite. The blue path led him to an attack aircraft, not a fighter. Goodbye, loops and Immelmans, barrels and corkscrews. But the young patriot did not lose heart. He gratefully accepted the wings that the motherland gave him. He accepted and did not lower them. Once conducting a Politinformatia, I casually noticed that Volodin every now and then looks in the newspaper. I wanted to reprimand him, but refrained. I decided to ask him later what he was so interested in, and what did I find out? It turns out that the newspaper printed a correspondence about the feat of a fighter pilot On an old I-16 airplane, he bravely went into battle with 3 German bombers. In front of the collective farmers, the brave fighter shot down all 3 Hitler's planes. His car was also badly damaged, but even here he was not confused. He managed to land the plane on the fuselage. People who came to the landing place helped the pilot to get out of the cockpit and picked him up in their arms. A real hero, repeated admiringly Volodin. Now are you also aspiring to fighter aviation? No, Comrade Commander. I used to want it very much, but now I don't. His answer surprised me. Why not? I know that once you dreamed of it. That's right. But my dream was first of all to become a great military pilot. To be able to barrel roll and corkscrew out of a corkscrew is only half or even a quarter of the job of a fighter pilot. The main thing is to be able to shoot and bomb accurately, and the attack aircraft opens the widest space for this. That's right, Captain, said the Serbian standing next to him. A hero is someone who knows how to really beat the enemy. At that time we measured all our deeds and actions by one measure. It is necessary for the front, it is necessary for victory. The crews strive to use every minute wisely for full and comprehensive mastering of new equipment. Technicians and mechanics came to the airfield with the first glimmer of morning dawn. They took off the airplanes wet from the dew and began to try out the engines. Almost next came the pilots. Another day of combat training began, even more intense than the previous one. The instructors rarely left the airfield. They even had meals brought here. During the day they flew without a break. They taught young people, and in the evening they taught them theoretical knowledge. During the first 3 months of the war, we prepared full-fledged flight personnel for several regiments. Intensive flight training was going on at all 3 airfields. Tasks were carried out in a variety of ways, with strict consideration of the level of training of the young pilots who arrived. The main focus was on practicing the most effective methods of combat use of the attack aircraft. Our successes became known in Moscow. It was decided to create more such regiments, to make them centers for retraining pilots from other types of aircraft to Illy. There was even a reserve aviation attack brigade, the commander of which was appointed Colonel Papivin, who later became a general. Our regiment was frequented by guests. The experience we gained was generalized and disseminated to other units. Many of the provisions of the guidelines written by us and tested by practice were included in the manual for the production of flights on IL-2. We willingly helped our neighbors, shared with them everything we had. However, we were visited not only for experience, not only by students, but also by teachers. In between flights, we listened to reports and lectures of major aviation experts, fine experts of IL-2 airframe, its engine and armament. Their lessons were of great benefit to us. The flights continued. Their intensity was increasing day by day. The main attention at this stage of training was paid to shooting at ground targets. Tens of thousands of shells and cartridges were spent daily. Armament service, headed by Sharikin, with all its good organization, barely had time to equip cannon and machine gun tapes. Aircraft specialists worked with full effort, often without sleep. And I asked the wife of the regiment, Elena, to talk to our women, whether they could help the armed men. After all, many of them were quite good at military specialties. She willingly agreed. The next day, Sokolova, Sherikina, Cherenko, Serbina, Volodina, Buzunova, Fisenko, Rumantseva, and other wives of commanders came to the airfield. Their help was manifold and quite significant. By the way, I would like to note that the women of our garrison were generally distinguished by their organization and activity. They were regularly engaged in various circles, where they studied military science on medical courses. Husbands, to flights, and wives to training classes. Once a week, women helped pilots and technicians to clean the barracks. All our living quarters were kept in exemplary condition. Some wives of commanders, such as Fatima Martinaitis, went on duty to the nearest military hospital. There they helped the medical staff to take care of the wounded. Fatima was also an interpreter. She knew not only Russian and her native Tatar, but also Lithuanian, Kazakh, Tajik, and Kyrgyz, and among the wounded there were many fighters of non-Russian nationality. Fatima Martinaitis also organized the collection of bed linen from the local population, which was lacking in the hospital. She was assisted by a whole group of women, Ivanova, Ilyina, Karpova, Kidalinskaya, and others. To us for retraining arrived not only ordinary pilots, but also squadron and squadron commanders. Among them were even regimental commanders, MSG Getmat, LD Reno, MI Genko V Philip. They were the first to fly the attack aircraft, and then helped their subordinates to master the new technique perfectly. It should be said that the entire flying staff of the units led by them showed an example in training and discipline. The impact of personal example was particularly evident here. But not all commanders were like them. For example, Major Z, who arrived for retraining, often went unnecessarily to the city. One day the regimental commissar of Serbia strictly asked, "Why did you come here, Comrade Major?" "That's a strange question," he answered. "I'll study a little and then go to the front." You can't defeat the enemy with a little. Real combat experience is acquired not here, but there, persisted the major, pointing his hand in the direction from which came the distant rumble of cannonade. And here they are playing war. Says your squadron commanders and ordinary pilots, whether it's easy for them here. Mup Serbian insisted. They are at the airfield day and night. Since they are young, let them learn. I have more flight hours than any squadron as a whole. A week after this conversation, the regiment commanded by Z was going to fly to the front. Pilots one by one lifted airplanes into the air. The commander took off last. When trying to make a sharp turn to join the column, he failed to cope with the control. Confused and on a forced landing, broke the attack aircraft. The regiment flew away without Major Z. After this incident, among the newcomers spread the rumor that Il-2, a machine imperfect, not designed for complex maneuver, it was necessary to somehow dispel the fog that covered their eyes. But if we had the IL-2 training airplanes, the problem would have been solved simply. The instructor would have put the newcomer in the second cabin, took him to the zone and clearly showed him what the attack aircraft could do. But since the regiment did not have such an opportunity, we had to look for another way out. And we found it. We decided to make several demonstration flights in the area of the airfield and over the range. First, I took off together with pilots A. Panagin, A.A. Karchenkov, and S. Ivanov. In front of the retrainees, we performed several complex aerobatic figures, then bombed and fired from low altitudes at ground targets. For the first time in the history of attack aviation, took off and landed in a formation. Then the same program was performed by a squadron headed by Squadron Commander A. Buzunov. Our flights made a terrific impression on everyone. In July 1941 began to arrive attack aircraft with airborne radios. We received them at the rate of one per formation. Since we had no IL-2s, we decided to create a special group of these airplanes to train alternate personnel. The radio improved the training process a lot. Especially it helped when practicing landing techniques and when doing exercises for combat use. Breakdowns became extremely rare. The efficiency of bombing and firing increased. As a result, we began to train faster and better flight personnel to staff the marching regiments. Our experience was adopted by other reserve regiments of the Air Force. The hot summer was over. Fields were bristling with red stubble. Sunflowers rustled in the wind with dried leaves. The bird chatter in the woods died down. The land was becoming empty. Enemy planes began to appear more and more often over Voronezh. Stifling, howling sirens now and then forced residents to take refuge in bomb shelters. Evacuation began. Wives of aviators were leaving for the east. The personnel of our regiment moved to the airfield. Aviation equipment was constantly in full combat readiness. Attack aircraft stood with bombs and rockets suspended, with loaded machine guns and now for training flights of variable composition allocated only part of the aircraft. Air reconnaissance was conducted intensively. The best scout was considered our link commander, Captain Ivan Lukich Karpov. In early October 1941, he was ordered to fly to clarify the configuration of the front line on the outskirts of Orel. Our command wanted to have accurate data on the location of enemy troops. Karpov returned much later than scheduled. When he turned the plane into the parking lot, we were horrified. The rudders of turn and altitude, planes and ailerons were riddled with bullets and fragments of anti-aircraft shells. It was hard to believe that on such a machine the pilot had made it from Orel to Voronezh. It was surprising that he himself did not receive a single scratch. The armor of the cockpit reliably protected him. What a machine! A real tank. Admired the young pilots gathered around the plane. You can fight on such a machine. There was no room left alive, and yet it arrived. Karpov was literally flooded with questions. They were interested in all the details of the flight. It's no joke. A man had a baptism of fire. I know the area well, I said Karpov. I served in Orel for several years. At first the flight was calm. It seemed that there was no war. When approaching the target area, Captain Karpov intensified air surveillance and began to carefully survey the area. On the most insignificant signs, he tried to detect enemy troops. Noticing a deep automobile track on the road, he dropped to 20 meters and walked along it all the way to the forest. Under the wing flashed the tops of bare aspen and birch trees, but neither people nor equipment was nowhere to be seen. There was still peace on the ground and in the air. Then Captain Karpov decided to attack the most suspicious object. The first such approach he made on a freshly dug trench and gave a short machine gun burst. Immediately the flashes of shots flashed below. Having looked closely from where the fire was conducted, the scout determined that it was only part of a well-prepared position, which the Nazis did not have time to camouflage. By imitation of attacks, only sometimes accompanied by short machine gun bursts, Captain Karpov managed to find the location of the main enemy forces. On it opened hurricane fire enemy anti-aircraft artillery. On the wings and fuselage, like pockmarks, new holes appeared, but the scout, maneuvering between the caps of ruptures, continued to clarify and map the boundaries of the area of concentration of Hitler's troops, aimed at us. Only having completed the task, he turned the airplane to the reverse course. Spattered with bullets and shell splinters, the attack aircraft became noticeably heavier, less obedient, but still continued to pull. Be that as it may, the reconnaissance flight ended successfully. Higher command received accurate and up-to-date information about the enemy. Both the pilot and his beautiful, surprisingly survivable machine were at the top of their game. In the deep fall of 1941, the Voronezh aircraft plant was evacuated to the interior of the country. The management of our reserve regiment was also relocated there, having handed over all its equipment to the marching combat units, and I was sent to study at the Air Force Academy. Here I greatly expanded and deepened my theoretical knowledge and mastered several new types of fighter planes. Still, I did not change my love and affection for the elite. After graduation from the academy and a year of command of the Academy Regiment, I was again sent to the attack aviation at my urgent request. I started my combat career in the 3rd Air Assault Corps, commanded by Major General of Aviation M.I. Goladchenko. We were already familiar with him from Voronezh, where he was retrained to fly an attack aircraft. By order of the Chief of the Air Force, I was appointed Deputy Commander of the 308th Division. Its senior flying staff in most of them already had combat experience. This regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel G.M. Korzinikov, Squadron Commander Zim Kukarev, I, Fedorov, N.V. Maximov, V. Strelchenko, and others. I especially liked N.V. Maximov, a young, medium-sized senior lieutenant with blue eyes on a friendly, open face. An unruly strand of his blonde hair hung down on his forehead all the time, even from under his helmet. It, to some extent, emphasized his will, energy, mobility of character. Maximov distinguished himself in the first battles, which the division began to conduct over Orel in the summer of 1943. His squadron flew out at dawn and set a course for Bryansk. Not far from this city, near the village of Kotinets, our aerial scouts discovered a large enemy convoy. 9 attack aircraft went to the target almost at a glide, fighter escort kept above and slightly ahead. The entire route squadron only once was shelled by enemy artillery, but this fire barrier, all aircraft passed safely. Minor damage was sustained only by the leading aircraft. A shell fragment hit the right wing and tore off a piece of plating. However, in the area of Kotinets, Hitlerites had such a powerful air defense, which we had not even imagined. It was thought that since they were hastily retreating, it was unlikely that they would be able to gain a foothold on the new frontier so quickly, and even more so to organize a reliable anti-aircraft cover for their troops. Underestimating the capabilities of the enemy cost us dearly. When the attack aircraft went on the attack, they opened fire on them dozens of guns and large-caliber machine guns. True, the Elias did not turn from their combat course and managed to drop bombs on the convoy. Several fires broke out on the road. But the first attack also brought damage to us. One airplane was so seriously damaged that it was forced to leave the formation and take a course to its own airfield. Maximov decided to repeat the attack. For Ilov, he ordered to suppress the fire of anti-aircraft guns, and the rest of the forces struck at the convoy. This battle was heavy. Squadron lost 2 airplanes. On landing in the attack aircraft, Maximov cut the engine, and he fell on the left wing from the leveling height. The fighter plane that was following it almost crashed into it. It was piloted by M.I. Gorovets, who later became a famous air fighter. Fortunately, neither of them was injured. Situation at the front remained difficult. Day and night there was intense fighting. The enemy gave our advancing troops stubborn resistance. The activity of his aircraft has increased dramatically. Often attack aircraft had to act as fighters to conduct real air battles. So it was on this day, being at the point of guidance, I noticed that a large group of bombers U-87 approaching the front line, and just then the squadron of Senior Lieutenant Maximov was in the air. I ordered the attack aircraft to immediately attack the Junkers to prevent them from dropping bombs on our troops. With friendly fire, Illy immediately shot down 2 bombers. The line of Junkers broke. Hastily freeing themselves from the bomb load, they began to turn around on the reverse course. To our leading edge did not manage to break through any enemy aircraft. Being with me Deputy Commander of the 3rd Guards Fighter Air Division, Colonel Amondreev heard on the radio familiar call signs. Mayor Fedotov leads his youth, he said with a satisfied smile. Guards Major A. Fedotov was the navigator of the 63rd Guards Fighter Regiment. He led the 8 Lavochkin. Hawks appeared in time. A new, even larger than the first, a group of German bombers approached the gully, where the headquarters of the tank formation of General P.S. Rybalko. Belyandreev took the microphone in his hand to warn Fedotov about the appearance of the enemy, as the airwaves heard a clear command navigator. Retention. The enemy on the right. Attack. Fedotov increased speed, and from the top left rushed at the enemy leader. The fiery jet rushed to the cockpit of the bomber, and it caught fire. Captivated by the example of the commander, bravely acted and young pilots. In the sky sparkled traces. Another Heinkel 1 crashed to the ground, but our fighter also caught fire. The pilot managed to eject with a parachute. Fedotov's group returned to the airfield with a small but still a victory. A. Andreev could not resist and congratulated the presenter and his pets in an open text. The next day, I had a chance to visit the airfield of the 63rd Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment. It happened that I got there at a solemn moment. The commander of the 3rd Guards Fighter Aviation Division, General V.P. Ukov, was presenting orders and medals to the aviators. Among the awardees was and Guards Major Fedotov. I learned about the further fate of this brave fighter after the war from a conversation with the former head of the operational department of the Corps, General V.A. Victor Alexandrovich told me that Fedotov made more than 200 sorties, shot down 10 airplanes personally and several in a group. He died as a regiment commander, being a hero of the Soviet Union. The great patriotic war it turns out, began as an experienced air fighter. For the heroism shown in the Soviet-Finnish War, he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner by the order of the Minister of Defense of the USSR from June 1968, Hero of the Soviet Union. Guards Major Fedotov Andrei Andreevich was enrolled forever in the lists of the 1st Aviation Squadron of his unit. Hitlerites were retreating through Kotinets to Bryansk. In these battles, our unit covered its ground troops from the air, destroyed the enemy's manpower and equipment. To solve the task was not easy. The enemy greatly outnumbered us in fighter aviation, and it operated from field airfields equipped near Oral. Enemy fighters, flying on shortened routes, had the opportunity to make a day much more sorties than we do. Their training was good. They tried to use the most effective tactical methods. Most often the Hitlerites attacked in 2 groups. One of them constrained our cover fighters, the other attacked the Ilov. True, a well-armed and quite maneuverable attack aircraft is not so easy to shoot down. Nevertheless, he cannot fight on equal terms with the Messer or Fokker. Therefore, our compound suffered significant losses. So command considered it advisable by all means to disable the frontline airfields of the enemy, to force him to pull his fighter aviation to the rear, and then shift the main attention to the destruction of manpower and equipment of the retreating enemy. Division Commander Colonel G.P. Turikin sent me to coordinate our proposals with General Mi Gorladchenko. Corps Commander after my report, skeptically noted. Assault aircraft are assigned a different task. We are fulfilling it. Our strikes will be more effective if the opposition of enemy fighters will be reduced. Well, it makes sense, agreed MIG General Gorladchenko. Let's try to strengthen the coverage of attack aircraft in the air. I did not argue with the Corps Commander. Returning to his division, reported on the conversation with the General Colonel G.P. Turikin. Certain, The order is an order, tiredly, and with obvious dissatisfaction, said the division commander. We will act on the enemy's artillery and manpower. Ridiculous. Chief of Staff PG, Ermakov did not hold back. Is it possible to send crews on a mission, knowing in advance that throughout the route they will be attacked? And of course, ridiculous. I supported Yermakov. Let us at least for a day or two put out of action their airfields, and that would be a big gain. What do you suggest? Arbitrarily abandon the main task, hesitated GP Turikin. Why refuse? Chief of Staff and I advised the commander to allocate for strikes on airfields only a few groups of attack aircraft, the rest to operate on the ground troops of the enemy. GP Turikin decided once again to contact by telephone with the headquarters of the corps. Very long conversation with Gorlachenko, but did not get anything. We continued to storm the roads on which Hitlerites were retreating. Now it is difficult to judge who of us was right then, Gorlachenko or we, but the fact remained. We suffered significant losses from enemy fighter aviation. Our offensive at Oral was developing. Throwing weapons and equipment, the enemy troops were retreating to the west, interacting with other types of aviation and ground troops. Our attack aircraft successfully crushed the retreating enemy. They made several combat sorties a day. German fighters now, we were less worried. They left the airfields where they were previously based. The front line moved to the settlements of Zaria and Alexandrovka. Intelligence reported that east of these villages noticed a large concentration of enemy infantry. For its destruction was allocated a significant group of attack aircraft to aim it at the target. We were the radio station positioned at a low altitude, in 4 kilometers from here, in a ravine, and were located Hitlerites. And so, when our attack aircraft appeared above me, suddenly I found out that the Corps units had advanced another 8 kilometers ahead, that in that gully there were no Germans, but our troops. What to do? It would be a grave crime if the Eilers hit their own. I look at the map, frantically looking for objects on which it is necessary to redirect them, and immediately contact the leader of the group of attack aircraft. After all, I have only minutes at my disposal. I briefly report the change in the front line, pointing out new targets, but for some reason the leader is silent, and Eilers are already becoming in a circle to attack. Then I decide to the last extreme. I call my name and repeat the order. Many people know me from Voronezh. Only after that the attacking aircraft reorganized and went on a new course further west. In the same way, I redirected the other group. The accident that could have happened because of someone's lack of direction did not happen. During heavy fighting in the summer of 1943, our aviation unit suffered heavy losses. Replenishment was required. And soon the division began to arrive young pilots, technicians, and aviation specialists. Among the newcomers were 2 Leningraders. I invited them for a talk. Very young junior lieutenants came to me. One of them was tall and swarthy. The other one was a bit shorter and had red hair. Both had just graduated from the school. Unfortunately, I've forgotten their names. So you haven't smelled gunpowder yet? I asked them. We have, Comrade Colonel, answered the taller one. And we saw hunger during the siege of Leningrad. Leningrad is my homeland, I said, inviting them to sit down. We had a long heart-to-heart talk, remembered the sights of our native city, cursed the Nazi invaders who destroyed and desecrated much of what was near and dear to us since childhood. Then I told fellow countrymen about traditions of our connection, about the best people, advised not to get hot when performing combat missions. Anger alone is not enough to avenge the enemy, B.I. said in conclusion. It must be supported by skill, combined with sober calculation. Obey your commanders in everything, look out for experienced pilots, take the best from them. After the departure of junior lieutenants, I was not immediately freed from the flood of memories. In memory to the smallest details resurrected the years lived in Leningrad. I was born in the family of a St. Petersburg worker. I began to work from the age of 11 at the factory. In 1917, together with my older brother Boris, I distributed the newspaper Pravda and the Evening Red newspaper. We performed other tasks that the factory party committee assigned to us, boys of 11 and 13 years old. Then the Komsomol, studying at the Labour faculty, flying school. I came to aviation in 1926 on a Komsomol ticket. There were 80 people in total. We studied for 3 years. But because of poor general education, the aviation school graduated only 40 guys. However, even this was a significant replenishment for the Red Air Fleet, which had just been created. There were new domestic airplanes for various purposes: fighters, scouts, bombers, including heavy. For them, they began to build airfields with concrete pavement, away from large cities, most often on abandoned land. Aviation towns were established. I was assigned to one of the new air garrisons. The station Seychelles, where we arrived with my wife, was marked by a single passenger car. We arrived there at night, and due to heavy snowfall, we reached the garrison location only in the morning. We were given a small room on the third floor of an unfinished, and therefore unheated house. A new life began. It was difficult not only with accommodation, but also with food. The country, which was raising both industry and agriculture from ruins, could not provide its falcons with much. At the Belarusian exercises, where the People's Commissar of Defense himself was present, the squadron commander died. The medical commission found that he lost consciousness from exhaustion, and on the eve of the flights did not dine, and in the morning flew out on alarm without breakfast. Clement Efremovich Voroshilov severely experienced the death of the pilot. At the garrison meeting he said, "The dry rations allocated to you, apparently, eaten by your mistresses. I will make sure that for you to introduce hot breakfasts." Such breakfasts were soon indeed introduced. We called them Voroshilovs, and a little later a good 3 meals a day were organized. Gradually the garrison was improving. We even had our own recreation center. It was equipped in a former landowner's abandoned estate with a park and a large pond. By our own efforts, we also built a stadium and sports grounds. In our aviation brigade grew up wonderful athletes. The names of squad and ship commanders M.X. Borisenko, P.P. Ryberkov, G. Mismaikov, M.V. Prokhorov, and P.M. Revenko. Aviation specialists Tarasovich, Yakubov, Frolov, Sakharov, Burov, and many others became known throughout the district. They in spring and summer of 1932 were spent in intense flights. Crews of heavy airships were persistently improving their combat training. Special attention was paid to bombing both day and night. In 1936, our aviation brigade participated in the Belarusian maneuvers. They were attended by 3 foreign military delegations: France, England, and Czechoslovakia. A detachment of bombers, which I commanded, was given a special task: to transfer foreign representatives to different areas of the exercises. The guests could have travelled by car, but for some reason they wanted to fly on combat aircraft. "Let's not offend them," said Clement Efremovich Voroshilov, who led the maneuvers. "If they want to fly, let them fly. They still do not believe in the power of our combat equipment." Members of the French delegation once expressed a desire to familiarize themselves with the equipment of the bomber. They climbed into the cockpit, looked at the instruments, looked into the compartments, interested in the armament. After the inspection, the French general did not hold back. "Here you are, gentlemen, and backward Russia." I wanted to say to him, "Yes, we are no longer the Russians you knew before 1917. Our motherland has become unrecognizable. It has grown mighty wings." While the foreigners went to the canteen, a squadron of high-speed bombers SB arrived at the airfield. It was commanded by A.U. Zolototsvetov. Returning from breakfast, the guest asked the People's Commissar of Defense to order these aircraft to take to the air and fly in formation. Clement Efremovich replied that it is not worth raising a squadron, but one bomber can fly. For the demonstration flighters, Zolototsvetov located the most experienced crew. He ordered him, after performing exercises in the zone, to pass over the airfield at extremely low altitude and at maximum speed. The pilot successfully completed the task. When he was rushing over the airfield from the wings of the SB, as if emphasizing its swiftness, white clouds of condensed vapors were coming off. It looked very spectacular. "You have good conditions for the development of aviation," said the English officer. "All Russia is full of airfields." We did not try to convince the Englishman that it was not only about the vast expanses of our homeland. He did not understand or did not want to understand the main reasons for our achievements. At the invitation of the People's Commissar of Defense of the USSR, foreign military delegations left for the place of landing of the airborne landing. It was impossible not to marvel at the spectacle when the sky was decorated with hundreds of colorful parachutes. The foreigners had never seen such a mass airborne landing at their exercises. An officer of the British Army asked Clement Efremovich Voroshilov to allow him to talk to some of the parachutists. Such consent was given, and he approached Senior Lieutenant Korolev. I knew this paratrooper well. At one time, he served in our unit as a flight engineer. The Englishman, through the interpreter, asked Korolev some question. He answered him in the purest English that he did not need an interpreter. The surprised guest opened his eyes wide and, after a pause, laughed. He had not expected such a thing from a young Russian paratrooper. Many things amazed the foreigners who came to us. They, for example, in no way imagined that we have such powerful bombs. Nagum telling colossal 6. They exclaimed over and over again. Exactly colossal. Even then, in the 30s, our planes flew higher, farther and faster than anyone else. Instead of Farmans, which were bought abroad, the Red Army received domestic bombers, fighters, transport, training and sports planes. Hydroaviation was developing at an accelerated pace. The potential of the Red Air Fleet was growing day by day. Maneuvers in Belarus clearly confirmed it. The country was seriously, truly preparing to repel imperialist aggression. True, we could not say exactly when they would unleash war, but the fact that the enemy was already swinging at us was obvious. That is why the party daily cared about strengthening the defense of the country, the training and education of soldiers of the Red Army. Special attention was paid to the development of the air fleet. A pleiad of outstanding designers worked on the creation of winged machines. Tupolev, Ilyushin, Lavochkin, Mikoyan, Yakovlev, Polikarpov, Petlyakov and Michi. By the beginning of the war, the Soviet Union was a powerful aviation power. We were strong not only in winged technology, but first of all in our people, strong-willed, courageous, utter. These are the thoughts and feelings that my meeting with young Leningrad pilots evoked in me. For the first time during my stay at the front, it made me look back so far and trace my whole pre-war path in aviation. I felt pleasant and light at heart, as if I had been on a date with my winged youth, which appeared in the guise of these two slender and handsome guys. To the airfield came the echoes of the distant battle, but they became quieter and quieter, and at last they were completely silent. There was such silence that it seemed as if there was no war. From a neighboring dugout, a song suddenly burst out like a bird. Who said we should give up? A song in war. After the battle, the heart begs. Music twice as much. A few more voices joined the softly sounding baritone. We're taking a break today. Tomorrow we'll be back to fighting. Why can't I hear your voice? My friend, my marching accordion. Let the boys sing. Let them consider the rest of this August day and a few hours of night coolness as a respite. Tomorrow at dawn they will fly to the battle again, and it is not known whether all today's singers will return back to their airfield. The course would be responsible and not easy. The corps was preparing to make a massive strike on the station Navlia, near Bryansk. The enemy was gathering there a fist for a counterattack. Apparently, he intended at least for a few days to stop our offensive and to cover the withdrawal of their divisions, worn out at Kursk and Oral. General M.I. Gorlachenko, together with the officers of the staff, carefully developed a plan for the upcoming actions. After all, we had never before flown on a mission with the entire corps. The day before the flight, the general called me to himself. I got on a communications plane, and in half an hour I was already at the corps headquarters. Tiny, smoky hut where he was housed seemed to me after the dugout almost a palace. "No, come in, sit down," said Gorlachenko when I reported to him about my arrival. I sat down at the table, on which there was a map with a map of the situation and some notes. "Tomorrow not only your division is flying out on an assault," continued the general. "I decided to consult with you on how to better collect in the air. After all, you during the parades many times drove large groups of aircraft. I really had enough experience in this regard. I repeatedly drove 5-9s in the days of aviation holidays, led air escorts at the funeral of Valery Pavlovich Kalov and Viktor Alexandrovich Kozlovnov, and now I thought that to collect in the air remaining in our division 36 aircraft is not very difficult. In addition, we have experienced pilots." Having stated my judgments on the issue of interest to the general, I familiarized myself with the plan of action of the rest of the corps, received the time set by the command to strike. When I returned to my airfield, all regimental commanders were already waiting for me there. Following me came the head of the air and rifle service of the corps, Major I. Steiger. General M.I. Jenko appointed him the leading officer and me the deputy. At the scheduled hour, the regiments took to the air. On command, they one by one joined the leading group. Above us went fighter cover. All this armada of airplanes headed for the front line. It was difficult, very difficult to control it. To prevent the enemy from figuring out our plan, we, by order of I, Steiger, changed the route, going not directly to the station Navia, but a little to the north. This maneuver, at the same time, allows us to bypass the main area of concentration of enemy anti-aircraft artillery. The plan was successful. We approached the target without losses. Do not bother neither anti-aircraft guns nor enemy fighters. On a combat course, Major Pestiga commands. Prepare to attack. The 1st Regiment went into a gentle dive. The ground was rapidly approaching. Soon became clearly visible railroad tracks, packed with echelons. On the highway leading to the station, moving tanks, cars, columns of infantry. At this moment in the air appeared in the black and whitish caps of ruptures. The enemy anti-aircraft artillery opened fire, but it immediately fell on its specially allocated for this group of attack aircraft. Firing anti-aircraft guns subsided. The 1st Regiment received some freedom of action. A shower of bombs and rockets rained down on the station. Flames danced below and clouds of smoke rose. Following our regiment in the attack went another, and then a 3rd Thames station was drowned in a sea of fire. Successfully worked, and that group of attack aircraft, which struck at the cluster of enemy personnel and equipment on the highway. Below were burning tanks, cars, rushing in panic enemy infantry. On the air sounds the voice of Major Steiger. He commands to stop the attacks, line up and go to their airfield. Some time later, our division relocated to Poshep. A new stage of combat work began. True, we flew less than at Oral. Autumn came with rain and fog. Weather days were rare. The lull at the front allowed us to more thoroughly engage in generalization of experience. In the regiments held flight technical conferences, which discussed the issues of combat use of attack aircraft. They were addressed by the best commanders, navigators and pilots of the division, such as GM Korzinikov, NV Maximov, V. Strelchenko. To their judgments and conclusions, especially attentively listened to our young people who had yet to participate in the big battles. After regimental and divisional held Corps Flight Tactical Conference. At it I was invited to make a report. I paid the main attention to the control of crews in the air with the help of radio, redirecting airplanes from one object to another. I think there is no need to list the issues discussed at the conferences. It is important to note that even in difficult frontline conditions we paid unremitting attention to training. The growth of combat skills allowed the crews to perform tasks more successfully, significantly reducing our losses. Soon I had to part with my faithful combat friends, fearless attack pilots. I was appointed commander of the 335th Independent Air Assault Division. I arrived at the headquarters of the Air Army at the appointed time. I introduced myself to the commander, Lieutenant General of Aviation N.F. Papivin, and from him went to the political department. I wanted to know who would be my deputy in the political department. I was named Guards Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Trofimovich Kalugin. They gave him a brief characterization. He was appointed from the position of Deputy Regimental Commander. He flies well on the Isle. He fought on the Leningrad front. It's good that he flies himself, I involuntarily thought. Such pilots will sooner love. Office 335th Air Assault Division was located in the village of Logovo, nestled between two heights. Upon arrival there, I immediately asked where Guards Lieutenant Kalel Kalugin lived. I was pointed to the outermost hut. I approached and saw a stocky man in a flight jacket on the porch. Ivan Trofimovich. Yes. He answers, turning his weathered face to me. Let's get acquainted. I was appointed commander of your division. We shook hands. It was the deep fall of 1943. It was cold, it was already snowing. I got a little chilled during the flight. Ivan Trofimovich must have noticed it and suggested, "Let's come to my place and have some tea." Said the kettle was puffing on the tin stove in the hut. When we undressed, I saw on the chest of Kalugin 2 orders of the Red Banner, the Order of the Red Star, and the Medal for Bravery. An experienced man, I thought, and I immediately sympathized with Ivan Trofimovich. Over tea, he familiarized me with the division, with the people we were to lead together. He told me, though sparingly, about how he had defended Leningrad. I also told him about the battles near Tula, Oral, and Bryansk. The more I got to know this man, the more I liked him. We sat up late at night talking. It was too late to go to headquarters, and I spent the night at Kalugin's. Strenuous work days began. The end of 1943. And the beginning of 1944, we were preparing hard for the Vitebsk operation. We put young people into service, flew in such weather in which in peacetime even covers are not removed from air. Due to the fact that all the old guys went to get new airplanes, even Trefimovich and I had to fly as instructors. From morning until late evening we did not get out of the cockpit. His authority as a flying political officer was visibly increasing. It pleased me. A personal example is needed in training as in battle. During the training of young people I got to know well, and the engineer of the division, Lieutenant Colonel Vladislav Evgenievich Titov. He had a lot in common with Kalugin, the same simplicity in dealing with people, the same objectivity in assessing their own and other people's affairs. Even their height did not differ much from each other. Titov familiarized me with the staff schedule of the technical staff of the compound, gave a detailed description of his deputies, engineers of regiments and squadrons, link technicians. These were people with a lot of experience. On the formation of the compound, we were given only a month, and then we had to take part in the battles. To meet the deadline, we had to solve all the problems simultaneously, complete regiments, squadrons, and battalions of airfield service, to adjust the work of headquarters, to organize the transfer of aircraft from factories, to put into service pilots arriving from schools. Very vigorously took up the cause Lieutenant Colonel Engineer Vladislav Evgenievich Titov and his deputy for armament Major Atsy Alarsenyevich Baranyuke. They had a lot of worries. It was necessary to staff the aircraft fleet, to establish the work of the entire engineering service. There were 126 airplanes in 3 regiments at that time. Of these, only 8 were on the airfield. The rest were scattered in different places within a radius of 50-70 kilometers. These are those that made an emergency landing. They belonged, of course, not to our division and not one, but several units. They were only assigned to us since we had started the formation. For each airplane assigned to the unit, we had to draw up technical documentation. And the machines that made an emergency landing were subject to a thorough inspection by senior staff of the technical and operational service of the regiments. Only after this procedure the mechanic of the airplane was sent to the evacuation team, and from there with its representative to the place of forced landing. As I have already said, damaged airplanes transferred from other units. The division had 118. They not only caused a lot of trouble, but also forced us to divert a lot of valuable specialists for their protection and transfer. In this tense organizational period was a lot of worries and political workers. Lieutenant Colonel Kalugin, we can say, did not get out of the regiments, made speeches, held talks with party activists, helped in organizing party and Komsomol meetings. His work, in which he constantly relied on communists and Komsomol members, played an extremely important role in mobilizing personnel to master new equipment, in increasing the combat readiness of the division. I remember we received the last batch of attack aircraft. I call the division engineer Titov and tell him that it is necessary to prepare these machines for flight. Mechanics have not yet arrived. Those who took the airplanes at the factory, Vladislav Evgenievich answers. They will return in 2 days. We could not waste time. I invite T. Kalugin, who this time was in the headquarters. Together with him came and the regiment commander hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant Colonel Veggie Bolotai. I explained the situation to them and asked them to give their opinion. Maybe other mechanics can prepare these machines, said Kalugin. We need to talk to the communists. Right. Bolotov supported him. By the way, today in our regiment party meeting, so let's raise this question. Admittedly, I doubted the correctness of such a step and did not expect that tomorrow we will be able to test in the air arrived from the factory attack aircraft. The airplane mechanics who were here were overloaded. They serviced 2 or even 3 machines. They had to sleep at most 5 hours a day. They worked 15 hours daily in the cold. Lieutenant Colonel Bolotov made a report at the party meeting. He spoke about the tasks that are set before the communists of the regiment at the final stage of preparation for the upcoming battles. Then spoke Kalugin. He called on the pilots to help technicians and mechanics to quickly put into operation aircraft that arrived from the factory. The communists supported this proposal and adopted a corresponding resolution. Right from the meeting, people went to the airfield. In the dugouts remained only those who were on daily duty. Pilots worked on an equal footing with technicians and mechanics. By 2 a.m., all attack aircraft were prepared for flight. Successfully passed and work on the introduction of young pilots. I would especially like to note the diligence of Captains P.E. Arefiev, Sajtikova, A. Mironov, N. Makarov, Senior Lieutenants Kryl, Tarakanov, Labzukova. In preparation for the Vitebsk Polotsk operation was being finalized. Our division had to provide the 1st Red Banner Tank Corps with air assaults to enter the breakthrough. Taking into account this task, we not only conducted flights but built the whole educational work. Practicing with young people the most effective methods of combat use of the attack aircraft, we creatively used the combat experience accumulated both by our crews and pilots of other units, tried to move away from the template methods. For example, the favorite method of attack aircraft then was considered to be from the circle 1 by 1. Aircraft came to a given area, stood in a circle and alternately made attacks. Sometimes the crews made 8 runs, each time exposing themselves to danger. The effectiveness of such strikes was in no comparison with raids as part of a link squadron regiment. In short, the method of 1 round at a time did not allow hitting the enemy with a fist. Let me give you an example. The commander of the Air Assault Division T gave the order to strike at a heavily fortified node of enemy defences. Each crew, according to the existing tactics, was to make 8 approaches to the target. All pilots were brave, disciplined. They carried out the order, but at what cost? The enemy quickly enough learned our tactics and easily adapted to it. After all planes dive on the target from the same direction and from approximately the same height. Having taken aim, Hitlerites literally at point-blank range began to hit our attack planes. As a result, the group suffered heavy and unjustified losses. This is what led to the actions of the template. And what did we propose instead of the existing method of attack? We came to the conclusion that the maneuver must meet the nature of the task at hand, determined by specific conditions, including the size of the target. If necessary, you can attack the enemy from the get-go, and not only in pairs links but the entire squadron. Why shackle the group with the notorious cool? This method is advantageous in many ways. It ensures the suddenness of attacks, gives the opportunity to build up the strength of strikes, opens up space for crews to show independence and initiative. It is also important that attacked from different heights and directions, the enemy is deprived of the opportunity to conduct targeted fire on the attack aircraft. Our proposed attack scheme looked like this. The first airplane diving on the target, bombarding it with rockets, on the way out drops bombs. The second attack aircraft or a pair of bombing strikes, and on the way out of the attack destroys the enemy with cannon and machine gun fire. Especially this combat order justified itself when acting in large groups. Each attack aircraft is armed with 2 guns, 2 machine gunners, 8 rockets and 600 kilograms of bombs. It is not difficult to imagine what kind of force of a blow can strike, say, a squadron of 12 aircraft. At one flight tactical conference, I made a report on the combat use of attack aircraft. Colonel General of Aviation F.Y. Aliyev, who was present, gave high marks to our searches and findings in tactics. By December 4, 1943, the 335th Air Assault Division was fully formed. We were enlisted in the reserve of the Front Command. Until the spring of 1944, the connection in the battles almost did not participate in the battles, except for individual sorties for reconnaissance. We mainly worked, as they say, on young pilots, taught them, prepared them morally. They had many different questions. I remember 3 junior lieutenants came up to me at the airfield. They wanted to ask something, but did not dare. Finally, Vladimir Guyayev dared to ask, "Comrade Colonel, you have been flying for many years, participated in the Soviet-Finnish War. Tell me, do you worry before a combat flight?" Am I nervous? Why bravado? Of course, yes. My answer, Guyayev. It all depends on what mission you're going on. Considering Gulyayev's question not only appropriate, but also important, I decided to talk to the young pilots on the subject. First of all, I explained that excitement should not be mixed with fear. Any person with a normal psyche can experience excitement. You sit in the cockpit and start to worry, because you know that the task is difficult, fraught with danger. But then you start the engine, start working with the instruments, and the excitement disappears. Now you are busy with your work and give yourself to it. And in flight you seem to merge with the airplane, become its brain. When a pilot goes on an attack, he has no time to think about anything else. His nerves are strained to the limit. Every muscle is subordinated to the attack. In such an environment, even a young pilot who before the flight had a sense of fear will be able to overcome it. I do not know how professional my judgments were from the point of view of a psychologist, But as a pilot, I think I reasoned correctly. The young people were satisfied with the conversation, and I made a conclusion for myself. This topic should be discussed with all newcomers. On the same day, regimental commanders and political workers were given appropriate instructions. To educate young pilots of high moral qualities, we widely used instructive examples from the combat practice of those units that joined our division. True, they came to us few in number. Many who served there heroically died or dropped out due to injury, but their exploits remained forever in the glorious annals of the war. The pages written in their blood became the first in the history of the division. In the spring of 1944, the 6th Moscow Guards Air Assault Regiment joined our unit. Its name alone sounded like a line from a hymn to courage and skill. Aviators of this unit heroically fought with the enemy in the most difficult period of the capital's defense. Under the command of Major Reynaud, they crushed tank columns of Guderian, participated in the destruction of other enemy units on the outskirts of Moscow. The regiment was awarded the title of Guards and the name Moscow. We gave a great place to the propaganda of the feats of the Guards in the daily educational work. They were discussed at party and Komsomol meetings, written in war newspapers and battle leaflets, organized radio broadcasts and conversations agitators. A lot of glorious deeds made Captain Nishuvin. In one of the reconnaissance flights he, returning from a mission, met with 10 Messerschmitts. It was impossible to evade the battle, and Nikolai Ivanovich decided to attack the enemy. Using the superiority in altitude, he hit from guns and machine guns on the leader of the first 5. The enemy plane burst into flames and went steeply to the ground. The rest of the Messers pounced on the attack aircraft, but then from the side of the Sun they were attacked by 5 of our fighters escorting the scout. With a sudden blow they shot down 2 more Messers. The loss of 3 planes, including the leading one, discouraged the remaining Hitlerites, and they, having stopped pursuing the attack aircraft, hurried to escape. The battle with the enemy took place near Tula. Our airplanes took a course to their airfield. When approaching the railway station, Gorbachev Nikolai Chuvin saw a fire. Some building was burning, and on the tracks stood our railroad trains. And on the open platforms one could see guns and tanks. Apparently this equipment was sent to the defenders of Moscow. Suddenly Chuvin noticed a group of enemy bombers in the air. They were making an approach for another bombing strike on the railroad station. This could not be allowed. Over the station Junkers attack, shouted on the radio Chuvin accompanying his fighters. Our Yaks crashed into the line of German bombers and one of them shot down. The others closed in and, shooting back, turned to the west. And still Soviet fighters managed to destroy one more U-87. This is how Nikolai Ivanovich Chuvin's flight ended. He not only successfully completed the task of aerial reconnaissance, but also managed to shoot down an enemy airplane. Major Leonid Davidovich Rhino, commander of the 6th Moscow Guards Regiment, showed examples of courage and skill in the battles for Moscow. Once his group dealt a powerful blow to the enemy airfield near Smolensk. When leaving the attack, an anti-aircraft shell hit the tail part of Major Reno's car. But he, as if nothing had happened, ordered to repeat the approach. At the airfield there were new hotbeds of burned airplanes in the parking lot. Tanks with fuel exploded into the air ammunition depot. During the second approach in the plane leading hit another anti-aircraft shell, this time in the left plane. The machine became even less stable, but gripped by combat excitement, the commander continued the assault. The third shell broke the fairing of the propeller of the plane, and it became almost uncontrollable. However, and this time Reynaud did not leave the machine. Pulling it across the front line, he landed it on the fuselage. Leonid Davidovich himself just miraculously remained alive. The second raid on the airfield was made by an 8-man crew led by Senior Lieutenant A.E. Novikov. It also managed to make several approaches. The flight of enemy aviation to Moscow was thwarted. During the raid, 3 of our pilots were wounded, but none of them stopped the assault. All 8 crews returned to their base. Soon the partisans reported that our attack aircraft destroyed 45 aircraft, 4 gasoline tanks, 2 ammunition depots, dozens of soldiers and officers of the enemy. The cruel arithmetic of war. Resorting to it in conversations, our commanders and political workers explained to the young pilots that not willingly we began to engage in such calculations. We were forced to do so by the Nazi invaders. We were defending our native land. We were avenging the invaders for the deaths of our comrades in arms, for the agony and suffering of the Soviet people. Valor, bravery and military skill of aviators of the 6th Moscow Guards Air assault regiment inspired our youth. Guys all as one were eager to fight. Sen, the Vitebsk Polotsk operation began on June 23, 1944. The 1st Tank Corps, which we supported, was tasked after breaking through the enemy defences in the area of Sirotino to enter the resulting gap to develop the success of the offensive in the direction of Beshenkovichi, Boysherikovo. It was commanded by Lieutenant General of Tank Forces V.V. Butkov, willed and commanded by the enemy. V.V. Butkov, a strong-willed and knowledgeable commander. Tall, broad-shouldered, with thick black eyebrows, which often frowned, he gave the impression of, in fact, Vasily Vasilievich was demanding, but kind and responsive. Before the 335th Air Assault Division Comcorps set the task to suppress enemy firepower in the Interlake Defile, on the way of advancement of Colonel K. Petrovsky's brigade. In no case should the enemy be allowed to blow up the bridge across the western Divina behind him. The crossing will allow the tankers to seize the airfield of Beshenkovichi, refuel the tanks there with trophy fuel, and get to the operational space. And then, I said, we will interact depending on the situation. For this purpose, we will send to you our representatives, Colonel S.O.V.L., Chernomorov and Captain V.R. Protsenko. I.R. Protsenko. Right. Agreed, Comcorps. Assigned to the division. I gathered regimental commanders and set them tasks. I will say to want, the plan of the command with some adjustments made to take into account the current situation we have fulfilled. Tankers heartily thanked the pilots. In front of the right flank of the corps was suppressed at least 4 artillery batteries. Here operated the 683rd Air Assault Regiment. Its crews from morning to evening, as long as daylight allowed, stormed enemy fire points located near the bridge over the western Divine. From the air, not only the broken equipment, but even the corpses of enemy soldiers were clearly distinguishable. The enemy failed to blow up the crossing. Soon our tanks and infantry passed through it. In accomplishing this task, especially distinguished squadron commanders and leading groups G. Denisov, B. Pedalko, S. Kovalchik, P. Andreev, V. Sabatin, V. Reitkov, and during the battle I was reported that the 6th Guards Regiment could not take off to fulfill the task. The airfield is shelled by an enemy armoured train. I sent to this target squadron of Captain G. Denisov. Having made 4 runs, it silenced the cannons of the armoured train. The 6th Guards Regiment immediately flew to the mission. Success in these battles was achieved by the efforts of all the personnel of the division. Colonel S. Chernomorov and Captain V. Protsenko skillfully guided the planes to the target, and regimental commanders V.G. Bolotov, N.V. Boykov, and M.P. Zaklepa skillfully led the battle. Heroism and high skill showed pilots P.P. Arefyev, Imirinov, Makarov, F.A. Sadchikov, P. Matkov, E.G. Denisov, I. Pavlov, Sesanasyev, I. Shabelnikov, E.V. Nekofsky, Yankovsky, V.E. Sophie, I. Solyagin, Kovalchik, and many, many others. True to the joy of victory was mixed with grief for the dead battle friends. Stormtroopers and tankers were seriously wounded Corps Commander General V.V. Butkov and Tank Brigade Commander Colonel Petrovsky. I consider it appropriate to mention here a kind word heroes tankers, Sergei Afanasyev, Boris Rastropov, Dmitry Vedrenko, Nikolai Pizarenko, Mikhail Sergeyev, Afanasy Shinov, Alexander Yudofenko. I was told a lot about their valor. Skillfully led the fight brigade commanders P.I. Benikov and A.I. Summer. In short, the pilots and tankers were worthy of each other.